Trump tariffs, escalating geopolitical tensions, and foreign aid cuts. How does it affect the United States and the world? Hello, I'm Mike Walter, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. We begin with a notable quote that was posted online by the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy last October before Donald Trump was elected to his second term as U.S. president. Isolationism, it said, once treated as a taboo in U.S. foreign policy circles, is becoming increasingly accepted as the country struggles to maintain its global leadership amid domestic fatigue and shifting geopolitical realities. Fast forward to today, amid Trump's trade wars, geopolitical tensions with, among others, Europe, Ukraine, Canada, Greenland, and South Africa, and drastic cuts to the once reliable U.S. Agency for International Development, which once managed more than $40 billion a year in foreign aid to millions of people, all raising the question, are we seeing a more inward turn in U.S. policy? For more on all of this, we go to our White House correspondent, CGTN's Nathan King. So Nathan, last week, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was in Belgium to accept an honorary doctorate on behalf of the United Nations. In his speech he issued this morning, let's watch what he had to say.
I'm here today to deliver a simple and stark message. Multilateralism matters, but it is under attack like never before. We can and must overcome this threat together. Now is the time.
Guess it goes without saying, multilateralism, the result of nations cooperating through international institutions and agreements, that contrasts with isolationism, where a nation focuses on its own affairs and avoids international involvement. So what do you make of what the Secretary General had to say and the Trump administration's current path?
I think this is such a good topic, Mike, because, you know, in the daily chaos of Trump 2.0, it's actually worth stepping back and trying to work this out, because there's a lot of contradictory messages coming out, and you could say, obviously, multilateralism is not Trump's strong point, but is it isolationism? Is it America first? Or something harking back to sort of the 19th century, earlier 20th century, this manifest destiny spreading across the West and the Philippines, Monroe Doctrine, McKinley, all that sort of thing, buying Alaska. Let's take it, shall we? I've got a list in front of me. Isolationist, sure. Anti-immigration, ending wars, you know, changing the support for Ukraine, pulling back from backing Europe and possibly NATO. That screams isolationism. But then you look at America first. Think of the offer to take over all of Ukraine's minerals. That's putting America first. There are other examples. For example, what else did I write? Offering to buy Gaza and turn it into a Riviera. The fact that they want to do deals with Russia, potentially spheres of influence. And then there's this manifest destiny thing, which I think is very new. We didn't see a lot of this in the first Trump administration. And what am I talking about? Well, wanting to have Canada as the so-called 51st state, saying we'll take back the Panama Canal, and of course Greenland, which is going to be in the news this week because we'd heard that Mike Walsh, the National Security Advisor, was going on a political level. Usha Vance, the wife of J.D. Vance, was going on a cultural level. Now we understand that J.D. Vance has said he's going Friday as well, and he's talked about reinvigorating the relationship with Greenland, and really had some harsh words again for Denmark, still pushing this idea that the US would take it over but not make a state. So the question is it isolationism? Is it something else in terms of America first? Is it a return to 19th century great power politics? And I think it might be a mixture of all of them. What it is not is what Antonio Guterres said. It is not multilateralism. It's something that Trump just instinctively does not like. The Biden administration tried to make things easier for the United States by outsourcing to allies, but still holding them close. This is not happening. Look at the tariffs coming down April 2nd. It doesn't matter if you're a competitor or an ally, it looks like you're all going to be here indeed. And it's not just Trump. Even Marco Rubio, who is considered a traditional Republican, or much more than Trump and others around him, said in his first week in office, he said multilateralism is gone. Multilateralism is gone. It is a multipolar world, and it's very unusual in history to have one dominant power. So this whole idea of America, which was always a bit of a canard anyway, of the US being the head of a post-World War II liberal rules-based order, which they always, basically didn't adhere to. You can think from Vietnam, Libya, Iraq, etc.
Right.
But that's definitely over. So I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the discussion, because there is a lot of nuance.
Yeah. Good point. Thank you so much, Nathan King,
No
there
worries.
at the White House for us. Well, let's bring in our panelists. Let's talk a little bit more about all of this. Jose Luis Bernal is the former Mexican ambassador to China. He currently serves as the coordinator of China studies at the Mexican Council on Foreign Affairs in Mexico City. Also with us, Pieter Cleppe. He's the editor-in-chief of BrusselsReport.eu. And Cameron Hume served as U.S. ambassador to Algeria, Indonesia, and South Africa. He's currently the executive director of Maritime Humanitarian Aid Foundation. And Ambassador Hume, why don't I start with you? I mean, Nathan says it's kind of nuanced, manifest destiny, kind of combined with isolationism, America first, kind of this hodgepodge. How would you describe it?
I think that's pretty fair. It's a mixture of a lot of different things. This is a country which I think is undergoing, changes. We're wondering what our position in the world should be. And I think if you look at the recent past, I'd say it was more of a metropolitan globalist approach, which particularly our European friends would find the same vocabulary and many of the same perspectives. And what we have now is we have an approach which is, it's not withdrawal from the world. I mean, Trump has spent an enormous amount of time in these 2 months on Gaza and on Ukraine, so it's not turning away with no interest in the world, but it's looking for quicker solutions, and that's very different than the sort of process-oriented approach, which is more compatible with multinationalism. So we'll have to see how it turns out. I just mentioned finally, Trump won with 51% of the vote. 49% of the people didn't vote for him. So we should keep in mind that this is a story which is constantly developing, and that we're not going to have definite answers.
Well, let me ask you a follow-up. You brought up Ukraine, Israel, Hamas conflicts. The February Morning Consult quarterly tracker of American views, kind of just measuring where their psyche is. They don't rank these very high as priorities. They kind of feel like interventions in other countries, spending trillions of dollars, not the right approach given the fact that there's unmet needs here in the United States. And when you think about that election where you say, rightly so, he won 51% of the vote, a lot of the momentum that helped him was this concept that people were frustrated with the egg prices and all of that sort of thing. So how do you measure this disconnect?
Well, I think it's a connect. Yeah, I think that most people are more worried about the egg prices on a daily basis than they are about the politics of Ukraine. And that's particularly true in the central parts of the country, do it with a broad stroke. And that's always been the case. Foreign policy is fascinating to the metropolitan elites. It doesn't rank very high for most Americans.
Ambassador Bernal, let's talk about these tariffs, which are kind of coming at us like a train heading towards us. The U.S. expected to announce them on April 2nd next week. Of course, Mexico, kind of right there in the crosshairs. Trump had basically threatened tariffs, then kind of walked them back, put them on hold, but all of that could end next week. And the impact on Mexico likely to be rather devastating. I mean, 80% of the exports go to the United States. There are some Mexican economists predicting worst case scenario. This could produce a depression in Mexico. What's your thoughts on how badly Mexico might take these tariffs?
Well, thank you for having me. First of all, I would like to say that Mexico is not responding so far with retaliatory tariffs. The Mexican position continues to be to wait and see what happens on April the 2nd. regarding the so-called reciprocal tariff the United States has announced will impose to all the countries in the world. In the meantime, the Mexican government has responded to the new demands by the United States with new measures in the fight against criminal organizations, by deploying additional forces to border security and immigration control, and has also applied some changes in its trade relations with China and other countries, among the most relevant decisions. We also have to keep in mind that the review of the USMCA is coming soon. Therefore, Mexico is getting ready to engage in these negotiations, considering the changing circumstances and projecting also alternative scenarios for the future of economic relations in North America. One of the major changes we're seeing in the bilateral relations between Mexico and the United States is that we cannot any longer follow the approach that seemed to work more or less efficiently in the past, that used to take separately the different chapters of our relationship. Until very recently, trade, border security, immigration, judicial cooperation, and security issues were dealt with as separate chapters in this quite intense and dynamic bilateral relationship. Today, everything seems to be on the table at the same time. And that's why Mexico has, in my view, three alternative scenarios in this continued negotiations with the United States. One is to continue with business as usual and react case by case to the new demands coming from the United States. This is what I consider a bumpy road that cannot be sustained. A second approach would be for Mexico to adopt a more nationalistic position, somehow mirroring what the United States is doing right now, and try to follow a more independent development. However, this is a difficult path to follow given the existing interdependence between our two countries. And there is a third option, which is being more under comments in the last few days, under which we could suggest the creation of a customs union in North America. This would be a disruptive position if it comes from the Mexican side. And with that, we could establish a common tariff to third countries and deepen our regional integration. We understand that there are concerns about national security, regional stability, and public safety, and that is why this scenario would be complemented by the eventual negotiation of a new security agreement in North America. The expected results would be more integration, more cooperation, and clear rules for everyone.
Very interesting perspective there. I'd like to invite Einar Tangen into our conversation. He's joining us from Beijing. And Einar, you've been watching Trump his first go-round. We're watching his second administration unfold, just the first couple of months. You've been kind of pretty succinct in how you see his worldview. How would you describe it?
Well, it's transactional. It's a mistake to think that Trump has policy. He has objectives. He wants to reindustrialize the United States. He wants to split China and Russia, or he wants to make a grandiose deal in which he can divide up the world, a kind of modern-day Yalta. But people are kind of flummoxed. They keep thinking that there's some big ideological, push behind his thinking, and that's just not the truth. He simply sees Mexico as a problem. It has to be subservient to the U.S. I'm afraid it will not be a situation where Mexico and the United States and Canada get together more closely, even after Trump. There has been a reset of the bookends. Nationalism, isolationism, nativism are now the course of action for many people. They may abhor some parts of it, but the American people have shifted rightwards because they believe that they are the victims, not the people that in many cases believe they were the ones who were victimized by the United States.
Interesting. Pieter, let me bring you into the conversation. We started off by asking Nathan about whether or not he's isolationist, and he had kind of this nuanced view. But, when you look to Europe, where there's always been this deep engagement from a military and economic perspective from the United States, that seems to be waning now. And the likely new head, German chancellor, basically described relations with the United States and Trump this way. Let's listen to what he had to say.
The rift in the Atlantic is getting deeper, and the question is whether or not we can still celebrate 70 years of the Federal Republic of Germany's NATO membership with the Americans. The question is not answered. Let's hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And the worst can be that we Europeans must now finally and definitively take the security of our European continent into our own hands, because the security guarantees of the Americans are no longer guaranteed.
So, Pieter, does he have a point? I believe we just lost
Probably
Pieter.
does have a point.
Oh, there he is. You're back. Thanks. Go ahead.
I'm back.
Yeah.
So he does have a point. There's a danger of a disconnect between the US and Europe. But I do think the jury is still out on that. It's not clear at all that the United States to abandon the transatlantic bond. I mean, Trump is known for putting the US interest first, and he's no stranger to the concept of spheres of influence. So I would find it very bizarre to see Donald Trump even sacrificing part of Ukraine that is still free, even if that were to be the case, and even if the US would follow him, it would be unwise for Europe to throw away their old shoes when they have not bought any new ones. And I think what you see in Europe among the leadership is still a disconnect with reality. They want to have some kind of peace arrangement and a peace corps that they would send to Ukraine. But then military experts behind the scenes have dismissed this as pie in the sky, also because the US is not clearly on board to back it up. And so, despite all the talk, we have seen Donald Trump taking action against the Houthis, which is actually more in Europe's interest than in the United States, because the Houthis have been endangering the shipping routes through the Red Sea. So in practice, I think Donald Trump is not abandoning Europe.
But it's interesting, you talked about the old shoes and the new shoes. One of the men involved in the decision by Denmark to purchase F-35 jets said he regrets doing it, and he actually went on to say that he kind of feels like at some point, he could easily imagine a situation where the USA will demand Greenland from Denmark and threaten to deactivate our weapons and let Russia attack us if we refuse. Buying American weapons is a security risk that we cannot run. I mean, these are not kind of the sentiments you would expect to hear from Europe, but we are hearing sort of these comments.
Well, yes, and also we could hear Donald Trump saying that allies receive American military gear that has been downgraded with 10% or something, he said, because, quote unquote, they may no longer be allies at some point in the future. And of course, I don't think that was a smart statement by Trump, because who would weapons knowing that you will to produce them in the future? We could see that in the reaction of the markets when they were selling some American defense stocks as a result. Also, his stance against Canada is a bit strange. It's puzzling. What is he actually trying to achieve? With still see some kind of a logic. Denmark is indeed not able to militarily properly defend Greenland. With Canada, everybody's puzzled. The conservative contender in Canada, Mr. Poilievre, he has been losing out in the opinion polls, part of the stance by Trump. So, yeah, like there's a logic to some of the things that Trump is doing, and some of it is actually within the orthodox Western alliance logic. But some of it is bizarre and is actually, runs counter the interests of the West.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Ambassador Hume, let's turn to South Africa because the relations have been testy right from the start. After he got inaugurated, he had this executive order. He was basically saying that white South African farmers were being attacked, treated poorly, their land being seized. The South African ambassador as well was declared not welcome by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. What are these episodes? Maybe you could talk a little bit more about these episodes, and what do they say about the relations there?
Well, first of all, I'd say we've always had a really complicated relationship with the South African government, and I'll just give as an example the previous ambassador, that is U.S. ambassador in Pretoria. And this was on television. The foreign minister called him in and complained to him about comments that he'd made regarding the visit of a Russian ship. I know nothing about the facts or the merits, but that also is bizarre. So it seems right now that the main advisor on policy towards South Africa is Mr. Musk. And, honestly, his approaches are not consistent with normal practice in diplomacy. But this is obviously, it's a matter of concern. And it's reflected it will be reflected, I believe, in the upcoming G20 meeting. Will President Trump go? Who will represent us? Mr. Rubio did not go for the foreign minister's preparatory meeting. So there are a lot of open questions. I find it personally concerning.
And Einar, in the global south, they don't want U.S. military involvement in certain parts of the world, but they do want the U.S. as part of that global multilateral trading system. And so how do you square these two, and what's the view there?
Well, the fact is, as I think Pieter actually reflected, Europe is completely at a loss. They're confused. And that even gets worse when you come to the global south. They have to choose between, this idea that the U.S. is an important market and that they have to somehow adjust to this, quote, new normal where there's no reliability in terms of the United States. But I think that misses the point. The U.S. is not going to bounce back. There's no coming back from Trump 2. Trump 1, yes, you say it's an anomaly and all of these types of things, but Trump 2 has shown that the U.S. is moving in a direction that is counter to the rest of the world. You have 150 countries who've joined BRI. You see the United States putting pressure on Panama to leave it. Well, they leave it, but here's the problem. BRI is an idea. It's not like they signed up for a defense contract or they were involved in, complex trade negotiations. It's just the idea that you build infrastructure and try to develop yourself. So at this point, I disagree that things are going to bounce back. It's a new direction. The United States is not reliable. Other countries are more reliable, especially when they involve kind of these regional blocks like BRICS. These are entities that are not pushing defense or selling you weapons that won't work if you go against their interests. These are countries that are saying, look, the only way forward is respect, trade, and security. And I think that is the new normal. This is just a period of readjustment. And the U.S. is going to, as I said, not be reliable as you go forward.
Einar, let me ask you a follow-up on that, which is obviously when you think about action, reaction, I was reading just the other day that Europeans are kind of not interested at all in traveling to the United States, and that tourism's going to take a hit somewhere in the neighborhood of $18 billion. Just looking at Europe, that continent, obviously Canada and the United States, same sort of thing. I mean, what are some of the outcomes that this could create?
Well, it's not just tourism. I mean, there are local economies that depend heavily on that. But you also have education. Remember, this is a kind of tourism, the idea that the United States is a place that can offer educational opportunities. When you see students being dragged out of, at prominent universities like Columbia as if they're common criminals and being deported, basically, an effort to try to deport them without due process. That obviously is going to undermine this this idea that the U.S. is there. Plus, Donald Trump using this sledgehammer approach of saying, I will take away $400 million from your budget each year, indicates that, there is authoritarian tendencies in the United States, and Donald Trump is wielding them. At the end of the day, the economic impacts are going to follow the political direction. And this is what I go back to my first point. You have a situation where the U.S. is not reliable. It does not reflect the values not only of Europe, but the rest of the world. So all of this stuff is going to have an economic impact. In essence, Donald Trump is bluffing. And I think that if people would just get together, for instance, Europe, Canada, Mexico would just simply say enough is enough. We are going to have a coordinated reaction to these tariffs. Within a very short while, Trump would move on to some other narrative about how the U.S. is a victim. He doesn't have the wherewithal to withstand an economic pressure to the people who supported him, who wanted price controls. They weren't up for this kind of tilting at windmills that he's doing.
Ambassador Bernal, the due process issue, of course, came up recently where 200 immigrants from Venezuela sent to El Salvador. They ended up in a maximum security prison. Of course, that case is in the courts right now. But on Monday, Trump also mentioned there's going to be a secondary tariff on Venezuela. For anyone who wants to purchase oil or gas from Venezuela, they're going to be subject to a 25% tariff on trade with the United States. What do you make of both of these episodes?
Well, I think that every Latin American country is suffering a different impact on United States new measures. And the impact is different depending on the degree of interdependence each of them has with the United States. I would like to insist on the case of Mexico, which is unique in this regard, in the context of Latin America, because we have to consider the high level of integration between Mexico and the United States. We have to remember that the United States is the first trading partner of Mexico, that the foreign trade makes up for 80% of Mexico's GDP. This is quite relevant because any change in trade affects the whole economy. At the same time, Mexico is the first trading partner of the United States. It's important to remember this too. And our two countries are trading more than $800 billion of merchandise every year. This means a myriad of industrial, transport, financial operations, as well as many consumer-related activities. But more importantly, there is also the fact that more than 40 million people of Mexican origin live in the United States nowadays. And this adds to the social complexity of our shared destiny, something that is very difficult to decouple.
Well, we're going to have
be affected by trade measures, but cannot be affected forever.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank all of you for joining us. We've run out of time, but a great discussion. Really appreciate your insights. And that's going to do it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C.